everybody, again. Welcome back to the Voice of Experience podcast. It's my opportunity, privilege, and honor to be able to speak to the industry. Every month or so, we get together and talk about things that's going on, things we hear, questions that are answered, especially coming in on the IP forum. I'll go ahead and mention that again on the forum. We have a lot of questions come in, usually have over 100 people on that thing. And it's on the second Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And even with the storms going on this past week, basically we had close to 100 people on there, I think. I'm not sure, but I just looking at the people that had called in the locations. But it is good to be here, and I want to share with you today on a couple of things that I've been involved in the last 2-3 weeks. Heartbreaking. One thing, too, I want to say up front, and Nick and I were just talking about it, and we may discuss it a little bit more at the end of this. We've had I've heard all kind of numbers, 20 to 40,000 linemen working storm trouble in Florida and Georgia, South North Carolina and Tennessee, and even further north in the last, month since all this stuff has been going on with the two big hurricanes. And I have not heard of anything that has happened, which I think is great. That means a lot of people are doing what I'm about to talk about, about the name of this article I just turned in to Kate it'll be in the December issue, hopefully. And it's something we're going to talk about on this podcast. But if you got that many people working in the field with the conditions the way they are, it is amazing to me and just a blessing that, nothing's really bad. No tragedies has happened. I hope, nothing's happened. And it may have, because I just hadn't heard. But the fact of the matter is there's just a lot of opportunities out there on storms. I think we talked about that the last podcast we had. And after working as many of them as I did, and I have a friend of mine that's out there now working, and this person used to work in a dispatch center, and now then they're out in the field. And I just made the comment to them. I said, looks a little different, real life and in person, doesn't it? It's always heartbreaking. It's always total devastation. And nothing's going to happen until we get there and pick it up. And it's just the way it is. But there's so many things and so much stuff going on out there that I am so glad. And we are so blessed that nothing that I've heard of has happened yet. Well, the article that I just wrote has to do with a couple of situations I've been asked to get involved in and investigate and offer opinions on. And it's been a really interesting month. And we had to investigate a fatality, which is heartbreaking. And also another incident where no one got hurt, which was really good, but had the potential to be a willful catastrophic event. And nothing happened. But somebody on that particular crew stood up and said, no, we're not going to do this. This is not right. And I'll kind of go through them and share with you what I know. And maybe you may be faced with a situation like this one day. I hope you're not. But if you do, please speak up. First, the name of the article that I've turned in, and I guess it'll stay, usually does, it's called Test and Verify. Not that we don't trust one another, because we do, especially when you work out there shoulder to shoulder, bucket to bucket, looking at each other in the eye with your rubber gloves on and touching primaries. Nobody's going to give you any bad information intentionally. Without a doubt, I know that as well as anybody. Nobody would do that. But the fact that we are human beings and the fact that we're fallible according to the measures I understand of human performance we can be expected to make a mistake every once in a while. And to prevent those mistakes from becoming tragedies, you take the following steps that we're going to talk about, regardless of who gives you the information or what they say. And don't be offended when someone does. It's my message is that, I love my brothers in arms. Don't get me wrong. I work with some of the best linemen in the industry that taught me and mentored me as I came along. But, at the end of the day, we still made mistakes along the way, regardless of how good you are. Doesn't matter. Well, I was given that advice by some of the most talented people, and I had the greatest respect for when I came along as a helper and a truck driver and then an apprentice lineman and a lineman as I was going through my career at Georgia Power. And then as I became a supervisor later on in my career, I even appreciated it even more. It just amazes me of the integrity and the credibility of the people that I worked with. Now, I'm not out in the field anymore, and I hear tell this things change out there now. But then when I became, I left the line crews and I went into training and then later into safety consulting for the company. I had a lot of people, a lot of employees, and there was only myself and another fellow that were the two consultants, and he took care of generation. I took care of distribution and transmission, substation, and all those things. We had about 9,200 employees out there, and our phones never quit ringing because people were asking us questions. We had new employees coming in all the time, so we were trying our best to train them appropriately in the basic fundamentals of compliance and safety before they ever went to the training center to learn the skills practice. So it was a very rewarding career. I learned a lot as I went through, and the more I did that work, the more I understood the principles of what I'm talking about today. Well, because of the things that I've been investigating, I had to investigate this week, this past 2 weeks, and then that close call incident, which could have turned out to be horrible, I thought about, Kate always says, well, what are you going to write on, Danny? And I said, well, I don't know. Let's see what's going on this month. And it fills the bill. I don't have to think too hard. And I think some of the most important things that we can take away from this is that test and verification. Always do that. I had an old lineman a long time ago tell me I've never seen a dead lineman with his rubber gloves on. Now, I've seen several now with them off. And even one of them only had one glove on, took one glove off. So when you do that kind of thing, don't expect a lot of good to come out of it. Also, we can't depend on everybody to do everything that they're supposed to do. When we go in behind somebody, and in the case of the fatality case, there were many contributing causes to the fatality itself. What I call the root cause was we had to dig on that a little bit to get to it, but the contributing causes were just stacked up like cordwood. There were so many things that went on out there that probably contributed to the incident itself. But the real root cause of that incident was just the lack of performance management and oversight of the individuals and follow-up. We just basically, we wind up trusting other people to do what they should do and knowing they're not going to do anything intentionally to harm us, but yet in the end of the day, it's catastrophic. And that's the sad part. Let me just kind of tell you what went on during this fatality and where it's at and who it happened to and all that ain't got anything to do with it. Okay, it does. It's really important. but not for the purpose of what I'm using the information for today. They had this particular 3-man crew had a pole change out. It was a 3-conductor open route secondary bus to a rotten pole, and it was a Delta 480 Surface. So that tells you there's only 3 conductors, no neutral, but it was a corner ground Delta bank. So there was one of the conductors was at ground potential, but it was really a 480 face to face bus line. And they went out and set the pole earlier. And then they came back a while later. They thought they had enough time one afternoon. Let's run by there and change that pole out. All we got to do is move those 3 conductors to the new pole, put a guy down, and we're done. Well, they went to what they thought fed this particular piece of equipment off of this bus line. Okay. And they went in at what was an equipment room to open a breaker. And one of them went in to do that. He manually tripped the breaker, took a voltmeter, checked the low side of that breaker, and verified absence of voltage. Well, then he went and took his bucket truck and the other bucket truck and the third lineman. There was 3 journeymen. They all went down to where the location was and set their trucks up. Well, when they got down there, assuming that the bus line was dead, de-energized, it's never dead, but de-energized, there was no voltage checks made. There was no grounds put on as regulations require. No rubber gloves were worn. They literally changed out this service energized at 480 with leather gloves on and never had a flash, never had an incident. And that's one of the most amazing things about the entire incident. That just proves the caliber and the conscientiousness of their ability to perform the job. But the attention to detail is what was the main problem. The breaker he tripped did not feed that bus line. Matter of fact, it wasn't even in the equipment room. It was on the outside of the building. None of the switch gear was marked, which are subpart S violations. Everything branch circuits are supposed to be marked. Where it goes and what it feeds, whatever. None of that was marked. The assumption was made and the test and verification was not done. And then the due diligence of the 3-man crew, they looked at it after they had transferred the 3 conductors to the new pole, and they looked. And he said, well, one of the conductors is a little bit out of sag. So let me just take a little slack out of it. So he took a set of jack straps, the rope blocks, and he went up there, caught it off, and it was on a 3-spool rack, metal rack, and he caught off, and it was the middle conductor, which in this case happened to be the one at ground potential on the corner ground. And he reached out and caught it, and he had a problem, getting his. Once he put strain on the jack straps, he got his glove caught under the hook, on the strap, on the block end, and he went to pull his glove out, reached up and touched the top conductor, and that's when the accident occurred. Well, at that time, the other guy in the other bucket was looking, just watching him, and the one on the ground had never seen anything. He was actually pulling the guy and everything, taking care of the ground stuff. There was no job briefing. There was a discussion. There was no written job briefing, even though it's not required. A good, thorough job briefing should be always performed. And when you identify the hazards, the 5 distinct categories on that job briefing, how well should everyone plan? Hazards, work practices, special precautions, energy source controls, and PPE. Had they gone through and really done that, maybe it would have been different. I think it would have been. And when The thing about it is where he went in and tripped the breaker and then went outside. That switchgear equipment was totally inside, or where he thought it was inside, and there was no verification of anything on the outside. With him checking the absence of voltage at the bottom of the breaker, he assumed that it was dead. Never make assumptions. Never make assumptions on a job site. You assume, but even if it's written, even if it's marked, that only meant the pen wrote that day. That don't mean that's where it goes. You still got to verify everything. To be as 100% safe as you possibly can, you've got to verify everything you're doing. You just don't take any chances on somebody else's judgment. Like I said, nobody's going to do it on purpose. No. But can we make a mistake? Yes. Can we not follow regulations and not follow rules? Yes. And the result, many times, I heard it said a long time ago too, when I was a very, very young apprentice. You got to make 2 mistakes to get on a memorial chart. One will get you in trouble. You'll have something happen to you, and if nothing else, but a bad memory of something that might have happened or could have been worse, with absolutely no result at that time, but just the realization of what could have happened is enough to make it very unnerving. But when you make 2 mistakes, when you don't test and you don't verify, or you don't cover, or you don't use rubber gloves, or you don't whatever, that's when it really makes a big difference. And it's so sad. And this was a very young person, hadn't been out of line school. He just got his ticket, had not been in the business that long at all. And he's gone. And that's the part that tears me up every time. I get very emotional and passionate when I talk about things like this, because, it can be prevented. And that's what I've tried to do with these podcasts, to share with you on some things that don't go there. Just don't do that. Do what you've been trained to do. And hopefully you were trained right the first time. And most people are today. If you're coming out of a respectable, acknowledged, accredited lineman development class at school, then you should be trained correctly. The other situation did not have the same result. There was no injuries. There was no incidents. There was nothing more than one person out of about 6 or 7 people that were on that job site recognized the things that were wrong on that job site and said, no, I'm not going to do this. And he challenged the person that was in charge of the work. And again, too, the person in charge of the work of this one here was actually the trainer of the excavation, trenching, and shoring for that particular group of people, which is kind of sad. That's intentional or willful violations, any way you look at it. And then what makes it even worse is when one person said, no, this is not right. We're not going to do this. The crew took a vote, and they were unanimous that it was safe to go ahead and do this. And that one person said, no, it's not. What does the regulations say? I've said many times, and I teach people all the time, and not that I know them all, but the regulations, I can pretty much tell you what word for word, what most of them say, that when it comes to situations like this, because it keeps coming up. And, you call me and ask me a question. I said, well, what does the regulation say? And they say, all right. So we'll go read it. And sure enough, when somebody calls and asks me to do something like this, it's so obvious of what the violation was. There's no reason for this to happen. If you've been trained and you look at it, it's like, why would you do this? Well, anyway, This particular crew had been given a job to do some task on a gas line. Okay. So they had to dig a hole, and the hole wound up being 20 feet deep. And that ought to be a clue right there to anybody that knows excavation, trenching, and shoring. They stacked two trench boxes without any corner support on top of each other, had a 2-foot leg extension on the bottom box, and it still was about 2 feet short of the top of the excavation. So that part there was illegal and unsafe. Well, there was a gap in between the box and the edge of the hole on one side, large enough for somebody to fall into, that was 20 feet deep. There was no fall protection, nothing around it whatsoever. And all of this, when this person walked up on the job to do what he was asked to do, he looked at it and said, "What are y'all doing? This is wrong." And then he started telling him what's wrong. And then, of course, the crew kind of said, "No," said, "It's okay. We talked about it and it's okay." There was no ladders, no egress access. There was no fall protection. There was no cave-in protection whatsoever because they had exposed top. I think the spoil pile might have been 2 feet back. I'm not real sure. I can't tell by the pictures. But at this point, it doesn't matter with all the other things that was wrong with this thing. And of course, when it's 20 feet deep, you should have a civil engineering design or whatever, to tell you what kind of shoring you really need. Shoring is supposed to have the strength to hold back the intended weight or the presumed weight of whatever the wall's going to be. And a 20-foot wall can be pretty heavy. Okay. So when you look at all that and you decide, why would anybody, is production that much more important than safety? What are we trying to do and why are we doing it? And then the really, really sad part about it is the same crew was out a while back and basically had another incident to where it did cave in without any shoring. And one of the employees was buried up to his waist. They tried to pull him out, couldn't, had to dig him out with shovels. Same crew. And I'm going, okay, what kind of history is this? It's only a matter of time when you keep doing things like that before something really bad is going to happen. And of course, my advice was you need to take some action here. And I just quoted all I did. I ain't getting into the management end of it, but I quoted the number of violations that I could see in the report that I was given by the supervisor and the pictures of the job site, and there were several. If OSHA had been involved in it, it would have been bad. I have a friend of mine that works in Region 4 here in Atlanta, and I sent him just one of the pictures, didn't tell him where it was at or who it was or nothing. And he said, "What in the world is this?" And I just told him, I said, "This is one of the ones I've been looking at and been asked to give an opinion on." And he says, "Where was it at?" I said, "Doesn't matter." I said, "It's been taken care of. Nobody got hurt. And the situation has been corrected, and we'll see what happens from now on." So, it's one of those things where, you look around, and I've had to investigate many, many accidents and several fatalities, unfortunately, and severe catastrophic injuries. And every time, without fail, when I'm sent the information for, either the OSHA investigation, if they're, defending the company or whatever, or somebody's trying to do something or get sued or whatever, I can read the accident report or the OSHA investigation, and without any question, you can look at it and tell which regulations were not followed. You do a root cause, and I'm a strong believer in root cause analysis because, simply put, it's a very easy thing to do, because root cause analysis is designed to identify the why, who was involved, and what the outcome was, whether there's punitive actions or whether it's corrective actions. How do you prevent it from ever happening again? That's what root cause analysis is all about. And the only way you can prevent stuff like this from happening is, on-site management of employees, good job planning, plan the job, follow the plan, and and if you see someone making a mistake, because they're not doing it on purpose, of course, if you see someone making a mistake, intervene. Say, wait a minute, time out. Let's take a minute. Let's talk about what you're doing right here, because this doesn't look right. You may save somebody's life here, and that's the key to the whole thing, is accident prevention. That's why I'm so, I'm just really excited, and I hope I have the correct amount of excitement about nothing going on these storms. That means there's a lot of people doing a lot of things right out there right now. And when you have that many opportunities out there, regardless, I don't care if it's nothing, in the IP forum, we had people coming from Canada to help in a Florida hurricane. They've never had to deal with alligators and snakes and swamps before. And they said, well, do you have any kind of job, analysis, hazard analysis for these jobs? Well, yeah, there is. There's a lot of stuff out there online. It's on YouTube and everywhere else. And he was pointed in that direction. But think about what can happen. Don't expect it to go the same way as it did maybe the time or two before you've done something very similar without the proper job planning, because I'm convinced, I don't care how good you are or we are or anybody else is, and then including me, is that we're all capable of making a mistake. We're not going to do it on purpose, but you just don't want it to be the mistake that actually results in severe catastrophic injury or even a fatality. So that's kind of my message today. And, I think Nick might want to ask some questions or make some comments right now. So I'll open the floor up for Nick.
Yeah, I mean, what you've talked about, it's serious, and it can affect not only the worker, the company, but family and relatives and loved ones outside of the company. So what are the main causes of why people don't test and verify?
Well, it's assumptions. I mean, that's all. I thought it was dead. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've heard that comment made. I thought, or I was told, and the assumption that it is normal when it's not normal. The only way you can correct that and prevent that is through test and verification.
So do you think, also time, they're trying to complete a job. They're making an assumption, like you're saying, as part of that, saying, hey, I was told this is dead. We're good to go on this. Instead of taking the time to verify that information, they're like, hey, I got to get this job done because I got 3 more behind it that I need to get completed.
Yeah, that's always on the plate. It's always a discussion point. But what I found, and I can relate back to my days out there, it's almost like a self-indictment on myself that I want to hurry up and get this one done to get to the next one.
Yeah.
And I think maybe in today's world, we have figured it out, especially with these guys that's been working these storms for 3 or 4 weeks. There's a lot of next ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the main thing, I was asked by an state association co-op director, will you get on social media and make a statement about working safe? And I just made a simple statement. And I think on LinkedIn, it's had 2,300 hits, I think. And I said, notice the lineman. I said, it's really important to get the lights on, and it's critical. but it's more important for you to go home safe.
Yeah.
That's all I said. And like I said, there's been a tremendous response and agreement with that. And that message, I think, is kind of resonating throughout the workforce now. You're not going to hurry up and get it on. It's like I tell people all the time. It took years and decades and even century to build this system, but Mother Nature can destroy it in just a matter of hours. And don't you think for 1 second you can get it back on really, really fast. Now, you might get some of it on, but it's going to take a long time to rebuild that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people, the thing that comes to mind when you were talking was, obviously it's your own personal responsibility to make sure you're testing and verifying, but it's also that brother's keeper thing, right? If someone fails to test and verify, then you are your brother or sister's keeper. You should be um stopping them and say, hey, no, 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 we need to verify that. I know, our crew leader or whatever had said this, but we need to verify that information before moving forward. It only takes a little bit of time, and people often think, hey, if I do this, right, if I've been told this, and I know I have other stuff I need to accomplish work wise, but if you just stop and verify that little bit of extra time it's going to take, because if you get injured, if you're off the job for months because you've been severely injured, or God forbid you die, right? Think about how much lost work, among many other things that are going to happen, because you didn't just take that extra time to test and verify.
Again, the sad part about a major accident is the family. I've seen some pretty horrible situations to where somebody has been severely injured and their families had to take care of them the rest of their life.
Yeah.
It usually happens. It usually happens um, to someone that's probably 25 to 30 years old.
Yeah, early in their life.
Yeah, it's early in their life. So now their family's got to take care of them from now on.
Yeah.
Not any details, but when you lose an arm or you both arms or something like that, and I've seen every bit of that happen. People don't. Well, and I think one of the fallacies is it's not going to happen to me. That happens to somebody else. But the reality is it can happen to anybody. If you're doing line work, it can happen to anybody, and that's something that you really need to take to heart right there, because you don't want to do it. It's bad enough to do it yourself, but what about your family? That's the main
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, that course we're working on here that hopefully will be out for the end of the year, the grounding and bonding. In your slide deck, you have an image of what that current will do, around the arm, where it just shreds the skin and wraps around, and that really, we talk about it. When you see something like that, it really wakes you up, and you're like, this is vitally important. We get it right. And yeah, that when I saw those, I mean, I've seen stuff like that. Again, that reminder, seeing that on your slide deck just shook me, because again, you're thinking of your coworker family, your home life. I mean, everything could change in an instant.
In an instant. Back in 2006, I think I was the chairman of IOTA, Inter-Utility Overhead Training Association.
Yep.
We had a national conference in Atlanta just before I retired, a couple of years. And they wanted a burn center presentation. And that's where those pictures came from, was Joseph M. Steele Burn Center. One of the best and premier burn centers, if there is such an animal, in the United States. And yeah, it's some pretty nasty stuff, because Grady Burn Center in Atlanta, it's got a good burn center. Joseph M. Steele Burn Center's up in Augusta, Georgia. I've had to go to both of them to see people that were injured and, interview. And do all kinds of things, and then basically sit and pray and cry with them because it's a horrible thing to see. Severe injuries like that and burns are the worst thing you can ever do to a human body. There's nothing any worse than a medium voltage contact, an enter and an exit wound. So it's bad.
Yeah, it's again, I think it humbles you to see that type of stuff and really makes you stop and reflect. So, with that, thank you for sharing this information, writing the article that's coming out in IP. Thank you for spending your time and effort.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to speak to the industry, and I hope a lot of people get the chance to hear this. And until I get to see you again, just keep on working safe and don't let anything happen. Look out after one another, and God bless you all. And we'll see you next time.
Absolutely, and look for if you got questions for Danny, he'll have some contact info in the footer of this podcast, as well as join him on the IPI monthly forum. We'll have that link there as well, and you can ask Danny any question you want and try to stump him or Jim Vaughn and all of them. I don't think it's been done yet, but give it a shot.
Yep. All right. Good day, now.
Anchored in safety, the IP Utility Safety Conference is setting sail to Charleston, South Carolina, from April 29th to May 1st, 2025. Register today at utilitysafetyconference.com.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.